My name is Emily, and I was married to Daniel for 10 long years that now feel like a distant lifetime. From the outside, we looked like any other stable couple. Pictures on the wall, dinners at 8, polite smiles at family gatherings. But behind the smiles lived a quiet emptiness, the kind you don't notice until it's too late. I spent a decade trying to build a life with a man who barely noticed the cracks forming under our feet. Still, I told myself we were happy, that this was just how marriage was supposed to feel. For years, I convinced myself that our small silences were normal, that his coldness was just stress from work, and that love didn't always need to feel warm. But deep down, I knew something was off. There were moments when I caught him staring past me, eyes empty, like I was a stranger in our own home. The intimacy faded slowly, replaced by routines that felt more like obligations than affection. I tried harder, cooked his favorite meals, smiled through the distance, hoping he'd notice me again. But he didn't, and I was too afraid to admit how invisible I had become. Everything changed the day we got the call. His mother, Margaret, had cancer, and not the kind people survive with ease. Her voice on the phone was shaky, not from fear, but from resignation, like she had already accepted her fate. Daniel sat beside me as she spoke, his face unreadable, offering only the occasional hum, as if she were discussing the weather. When the call ended, he shrugged and went back to checking his emails, while I sat there stunned, my heart sinking for a woman who had always shown me kindness. I knew then she would need someone, and I already knew it wouldn't be her children. In the weeks that followed, not one of Margaret's children showed up, not even for a doctor's visit. There were excuses, always excuses, work, travel, family obligations, but never action, never presence. Daniel kept saying, "She's strong, she'll manage." Like strength could substitute for chemotherapy and lonely hospital beds. I watched as calls went unanswered and messages sat unread, while Margaret's pain grew heavier each day. It became heartbreakingly clear that she had been abandoned by the people she had given everything to. I couldn't stand it anymore, watching her suffer while the people who should have cared most stayed distant and cold. I quit my job without hesitation, walked into my manager's office and handed over my resignation with shaking hands but a steady voice. I didn't do it for praise or attention. I did it because someone had to, and I couldn't live with myself if I turned away. Daniel barely looked up when I told him, just muttered something about doing whatever I wanted. That moment felt like the first step into a fire I didn't yet realize would consume my entire life. From that day on, I became Margaret's shadow, preparing her meals, managing her medications, scheduling every painful treatment with military precision. I learned to carry her when she couldn't walk, to clean her wounds with trembling hands, to hold my breath when she vomited blood. Days bled into nights, and I often forgot to eat or sleep, running on pure willpower and silent prayers. I smiled when she needed strength and cried only when the house was dark and quiet. No one offered help. No one called. It was just me and her, surviving 1 hour at a time. The nights were the worst, her body trembling, skin damp with sweat, eyes begging for mercy I couldn't give. She would cry out in her sleep, and I'd rush to her side, wiping her tears with one hand while gripping her cold fingers with the other. Her bones seemed to shrink inside her skin, her voice reduced to whispers that cracked in her throat. I sang to her sometimes, not to ease her pain, but to fill the silence that felt like death itself creeping closer. I started losing track of what day it was, only that I had to keep her alive a little longer. During those rare, quiet mornings when the pain gave her a brief reprieve, she would reach for my hand and whisper things I still carry in my heart. "You're more than a daughter to me," she once said, her voice thin but filled with certainty. I didn't respond, I just smiled and squeezed her fingers, afraid my voice would betray the knot in my throat. She started calling me Nina, and every time she said it, I felt a strange warmth I hadn't known in years. For her, I wasn't just her son's wife. I was the only family left. Daniel rarely visited, maybe once every 2 weeks, and even then he stayed for minutes, avoiding eye contact with both of us. He always had an excuse. Too many meetings, the car acting up, a headache, or simply I forgot. I never confronted him. I was too exhausted, too focused on keeping Margaret alive to fight another losing battle. But each time he left without a glance, something inside me cracked, like a mirror breaking in slow motion. I was still his wife technically, but I had never felt more alone in my life. I began to disappear, not physically, but in ways I couldn't explain. My reflection looked unfamiliar, and my name felt like a sound no one used anymore. The silence in our house stretched longer than the nights beside Margaret's bed, and I stopped waiting for Daniel to ask how I was. There were moments I wanted to scream, just to hear my own voice, to remind myself I was still alive beneath the grief and abandonment. I wrote letters to myself in the dark, folded them and threw them away before sunrise. All I had was duty, and it was slowly devouring me. Margaret's body began to shut down slowly, each day stealing something else: her appetite, her voice, her memory. I sat beside her bed as the monitors beeped steadily, then less steadily, until they were just soft reminders that time was slipping away. Her breaths became shallower, her eyes distant, like she was already somewhere else. I held her hand through the silence, whispering that I was there, that she wasn't alone, that it was okay to let go. And when she exhaled one final time, the room fell into a stillness I'll never forget. I didn't scream. I didn't fall to the ground. I just stood there, frozen, staring at her lifeless face, feeling the weight of every moment we'd shared collapse into that breathless hush. I brushed the hair from her forehead and kissed her goodbye, tears sliding down my cheeks without a sound. There was no funeral crowd waiting, no comforting arms, no one to cry with me. I mourned alone. And as much as it broke me, part of me felt relief that her pain was over. 3 days later, just as the numbness started settling into my bones, I received a call from a man named Mr. Thompson, Margaret's longtime lawyer. He said the family was to gather for the reading of her will, that Margaret had left behind instructions for a formal meeting. His voice was calm, distant, professional, but something in his tone made me sit up straight. I asked if Daniel already knew, and Mr. Thompson confirmed he had notified all immediate relatives. I hung up the phone, heart pounding, unsure what Margaret had wanted them to hear. That evening, I asked Daniel if he would come with me to the reading, hoping foolishly for some sign of shared grief or responsibility. He didn't even look up from his phone when he muttered, "I'll get there. Maybe a little late, depending on traffic." I stared at him, stunned by his indifference, realizing he had truly detached from everything connected to his mother's death. No apology, no reflection, just casual disinterest, as if we were discussing a routine appointment. I nodded silently, knowing I would have to face whatever was coming alone. The morning of the reading, I dressed in black, my hands shaking as I slipped on Margaret's old bracelet, the one she had given me during chemo. I walked into the lawyer's office and sat in the front row, avoiding eye contact with the murmuring relatives scattered behind me. The room smelled like old wood and cold air, and every breath felt like it scraped my throat. I clutched my bag tightly, trying to appear composed, but inside I was breaking apart. My heart beat louder than the whispers around me. Margaret's siblings, nieces, nephews, people I hadn't seen in years, filtered in, giving me sideways glances and thin, forced smiles. Some barely acknowledged me, others stared with open curiosity, as if wondering why I sat so close to the front. Their voices hummed behind me in low tones, words like caretaker and nurse floating through the air. I kept my eyes on the table ahead, fighting the urge to run out and breathe. None of them had been there during the worst days. Yet here they were, waiting for their share of her life. 5 minutes after the scheduled time, just as Mr. Thompson began arranging the folders, the heavy door creaked open and all heads turned. In walked Daniel, perfectly pressed in a navy suit, his expression unreadable. But what made my blood run cold wasn't him. It was the woman at his side, young, striking, and holding his hand like it belonged to her. and in her other arm, wrapped in a pale blue blanket, was a newborn baby. I stared, unable to breathe, my world spinning off its axis. The child in her arms couldn't have been more than a few weeks old, his tiny head resting against her chest, utterly innocent and unaware of the destruction unfolding around him. I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. This woman, this child, Daniel's proud posture. My body froze, but my mind screamed, connecting dots I had tried to ignore for too long. He walked past me without hesitation, guiding her to 2 empty chairs across the room, as if he'd brought honored guests. I felt something in me begin to shatter. I couldn't stop staring at the baby, then at Daniel, then at the girl beside him, her hand now resting on his thigh, her eyes locked on mine with something close to triumph. My breath turned shallow, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard it hurt. A coldness spread through me, starting in my chest and crawling outward, numbing everything. I had questions, thousands, but they all narrowed into one jagged thought. What is this? And I knew I wouldn't leave that room without an answer. I stood abruptly, the chair screeching behind me, my voice louder than I expected as I demanded, "Who is she, Daniel? And whose baby is that?" The room fell silent, the whispers vanished, and all eyes turned to us. Daniel didn't flinch. He looked at me with an unsettling calm, as if this confrontation had been rehearsed in his head. The woman adjusted the baby and glanced up at him with a smirk, waiting for him to speak. And when he finally opened his mouth, my entire world tilted on its side. Daniel looked me straight in the eye and said, without hesitation or remorse, "He's my son." The words hit like a punch to the chest, sharp, deliberate, unforgivable. I felt the breath leave my body as the room blurred, the truth slicing through 10 years of loyalty and silence like a blade. He didn't explain, didn't soften the blow. Just let it hang there, a cruel declaration. Everyone around us sat frozen, waiting for my reaction like spectators at an execution. With a casual shrug, he continued, "We've been together for a year. It just happened. A year." While I cleaned his mother's wounds, while I gave up my job and my life, he was building a secret one with her. The woman beside him stayed silent, her expression smug, one hand gently rocking the baby as if none of this was twisted. I wanted to scream, to cry, to run, but I stood still, my hands trembling at my sides. Betrayal like that doesn't sting, it scorches. Everything I thought I had, every shared moment, every vow, turned to ash in that single moment. I remembered the anniversary dinners I cooked alone, the nights he came home late, the kisses that felt colder each year. All the doubts I'd buried came rushing back with brutal clarity, and I realized I had loved a ghost. My heart didn't just break. It crumbled into pieces too small to gather. And through it all, he sat there emotionless, like none of it really mattered. Then, as if the pain he caused wasn't enough, Daniel leaned forward and said, "We want to raise the baby together, but we need help. Maybe we could all live under the same roof, just until things settle." The audacity knocked the air from my lungs. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was asking for support. As if I was supposed to mother his new family after he destroyed mine. I stared at him, speechless, trying to understand how someone could be so cold, so shameless, so utterly detached from reality. My stomach turned, a wave of sickness crawling up my throat as I shook my head, slowly at first, then with more force. "No," I said, my voice low but steady. "Not in this lifetime." I saw his expression shift, confusion flickering behind his eyes like he couldn't understand my reaction. Rage, betrayal, humiliation. All of it twisted inside me, burning from the inside out. I backed away from him, as if the very air around him was toxic. I knew right then I would never forgive this. The young woman beside him didn't hide her smirk. She looked at me like she'd already won, like I was the forgotten chapter in a story she had rewritten. Her eyes scanned me slowly, judging, dismissing, mocking, all in a single glance. She cradled the baby closer, almost possessively, like he was a trophy she had earned. I clenched my fists to keep from speaking, from lunging, from shattering what little composure I had left. That smile was going to haunt me for years. Before I could react, Mr. Thompson cleared his throat and opened the folder in front of him, bringing the room to order with a quiet authority. "Let's begin," he said, his voice slicing through the tension like a razor. I sat down slowly, never taking my eyes off Daniel, my pulse still pounding in my ears. The lawyer's words began to fill the space, formal and measured, but every line felt like it carried the weight of something bigger. Everyone leaned in, waiting for the real reason we had gathered. Mr. Thompson read a letter Margaret had written in her final weeks, her words steady, filled with the grace and strength I had seen in her even as her body failed. To the one who never left my side. It began, and I felt my throat tighten. She spoke of my sacrifice, my loyalty, the nights I held her hand when no one else cared. "You were the daughter I never had," she wrote, and the room shifted. The silence now felt heavier, expectant, as her love for me was laid bare before them all. Then came the part that changed everything. Margaret had left her entire estate, including her home and life savings, to me. Not to her children, not to Daniel, but to the woman who stood by her through every nightmare. Gasps echoed around the room, chairs creaked, someone whispered, "What?" But I couldn't move. I sat frozen, my eyes locked on the lawyer's face, unsure if I had heard right. And then I realized she had known. She had seen everything. And this was her final act of justice. Daniel stood up so fast his chair toppled backward, his face twisted in disbelief and fury. "That's not possible," he shouted, pointing at me like I was the thief. "She would never do that." She was confused, she was sick. The lawyer didn't flinch, calmly picking up the next document. I turned to face Daniel fully for the first time that day, seeing not a husband, not a partner, but a man who had finally lost control. And for the first time in years I wasn't afraid. Mr. Thompson didn't raise his voice or respond to Daniel's outburst. He simply slid another set of papers across the table and said, "Your mother updated her will with full mental capacity, witnessed and notarized." His tone was firm, untouched by the chaos Daniel had unleashed. The silence that followed was louder than any scream, filled with disbelief and simmering tension. I saw Daniel glance down at the documents, searching for a loophole that didn't exist. But there was no escape. Margaret had spoken, and her word was final. Daniel's face turned red, veins visible along his neck as he slammed his fist on the table, shouting that I had manipulated his mother, poisoned her against her own family. "She was dying," he barked. "She didn't know what she was doing." The baby in the woman's arms started crying, but Daniel didn't even glance at him. His fury was aimed solely at me. But I didn't flinch. I met his anger with silence, not because I was weak, but because I knew the truth didn't need defending. Mr. Thompson calmly opened a folder and pulled out a letter handwritten by Margaret, dated and signed months before her condition worsened. "This was written long before her decline," he explained, passing it around. The letter was clear, detailed, and unmistakable. Margaret had made the decision of sound mind, moved by what she had witnessed firsthand. She spoke of abandonment, of watching her children disappear while I stayed. No one in that room could argue with her words. They were too raw, too real, too undeniable. When the letter was read aloud, I heard gasps, stifled murmurs, and the rustle of people shifting uncomfortably in their chairs. Some avoided my eyes, others stared in disbelief, like they had never considered me anything more than an outsider. Now, I was the woman Margaret had trusted above all else. The weight of their judgment melted away as they realized I hadn't taken anything. I had been given it. Not through manipulation, but through love, loyalty, and sacrifice they had never offered. Daniel sank back into his seat, face pale, jaw tight, his eyes darting back and forth like he couldn't find a place to land. His arrogance deflated right in front of everyone. His protests reduced to silence as the truth settled around him. The woman beside him leaned away slightly, her confidence clearly shaken now that her golden future was slipping through her fingers. Daniel looked at me for a long second, no longer angry, just lost. He had played his game and lost everything. She leaned in and whispered something into Daniel's ear. Her eyes locked on the lawyer as if planning her next move. Whatever she said, it wasn't sweet. Daniel's jaw clenched harder, his fingers tapping anxiously against the table. Her expression darkened, no longer smug but calculating, and I saw the panic flicker behind her mask. She had walked into this room expecting victory, but now the silence between them spoke louder than any threat. They weren't a team, they were already unraveling. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I sat with my hands folded, holding back the tears that burned at the corners of my eyes. This moment wasn't about revenge, it was about truth being seen finally. After so many years of being invisible, Margaret had given me back something Daniel had taken long ago, my dignity. And I would protect it, not with anger, but with the quiet power of a woman who has nothing left to prove. Mr. Thompson closed the folder and handed me the official papers, his voice calm and final as he confirmed, "It's done." I held the documents with steady hands, the weight of everything crashing into me at once. Around me the room stirred with awkward movement, people standing, gathering coats, avoiding my eyes. Daniel didn't move, still frozen, staring blankly at the floor. I walked out without a word, carrying more than an inheritance. I carried closure. That night I sat on the edge of our bed, my bed in our house, but it no longer felt like home. The walls were too quiet, the silence too full of betrayal and ghosts. I looked around at everything we had built together and realized it had never really belonged to me. My name was on the title, but my heart had long been erased from this place. And with that final thought, I knew I could never stay. I packed my suitcase slowly, not in a rush, not in anger, but with quiet resolve. Every item I folded was a piece of myself I was reclaiming. Every drawer I emptied, a chapter one was ready to close. Daniel didn't stop me. He didn't even come home that night. And when I stepped outside and closed the door behind me, I didn't look back. Because I wasn't running away. I was finally walking towards something better. I arrived in a small coastal town 3 hours from everything I once knew. A place where no one recognized my name or my past. The air smelled like salt and possibility, and for the first time in years, I could breathe without the weight of someone else's expectations. I rented a modest apartment above a bookstore, its creaky floors and chipped windows feeling more like home than the house I had shared with Daniel. I didn't know a soul, but I had peace. And after everything, that was enough. I told myself I wasn't starting over. I was simply beginning. With the inheritance Margaret left me, I made a choice that terrified me. I opened a small artisan bakery on the corner of Main Street, something I had only ever dreamed of. I used every cent wisely, watching every purchase, pouring my heart into the flours I scrubbed and the recipes I perfected. It wasn't about money, it was about building something that was mine, something untouched by betrayal. People started coming in, drawn by the smell of warm bread and something else, maybe the quiet strength behind the counter. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was planting roots. The beginning was brutal. Long nights baking alone, mornings spent scrubbing ovens, and afternoons wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. There were days I didn't sell enough to cover rent, and nights I cried over receipts and bills I couldn't balance. I missed Margaret's voice, her quiet encouragement, the way she made me feel seen. But even in the loneliness, I kept going, fueled by a stubborn fire that refused to go out. I had already lost everything once. I wasn't going to let fear take what I had left. Slowly, things began to change. Customers returned, brought friends, posted about my bakery online. Orders doubled, then tripled, and the once quiet shop filled with life, laughter, and the smell of cinnamon and hope. People started calling me by name, asking about my story, telling me how my pastries reminded them of home. I hired 2 helpers and expanded the menu, and for the first time I didn't feel like I was chasing something. I had arrived. The bakery wasn't just a business. It was proof that something beautiful could grow from ruin. Standing behind that counter, covered in flour and smiling at strangers, I felt a power I had never known. I didn't need anyone's permission, approval, or apology. I was enough on my own. I made every decision, earned every cent, and found peace in the rhythm of early mornings and fresh dough. There were no shadows behind me, no ghost of Daniel in the corner. I wasn't Emily, the wife or the widow of a failed marriage. I was simply Emily, strong and free. Months passed before I heard his name again, Daniel. A mutual friend messaged me late one night, saying he had seen my bakery featured in a magazine article about local entrepreneurs. He knows, the message ended. I stared at the screen for a long time, unsure if I felt fear or satisfaction. Part of me hoped he would stay wherever he was, buried in the life he chose. But deep down I knew Daniel, and I knew he wouldn't be able to stay away for long. 2 weeks later, he showed up at the bakery. Uninvited, unannounced, standing awkwardly near the entrance like he didn't belong. He looked thinner, older, less sure of himself, wearing the same cologne that once made my heart race but now only reminded me of lies. When I walked out of the kitchen and saw him, our eyes met for the first time in almost a year. "Emily," he said softly, like my name still meant something to him, but to me it sounded like a language I no longer spoke. He asked if we could talk, said he made mistakes, that he missed me, that he still loved me, even while still living with the woman who had torn us apart. I listened quietly, watching him repeat the same rehearsed words he probably used on her, on everyone. He spoke of regret and timing and fate, but never once did he mention accountability. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I let him speak, not for his sake, but for mine, to hear how small and hollow his apologies had become. When he finished, I looked him in the eye and said, "You don't know me anymore, and you don't get to." My voice was calm, each word deliberate, carrying the weight of every sleepless night he never stayed for. His face fell, surprise flickering across his features like he truly expected me to crumble. But I didn't. I stood taller. "You broke someone I used to be," I added, "and she's not here anymore." Then I turned and walked away, leaving him with the silence he once gave me. Weeks later, another message reached me, this time from one of Daniel's cousins. The woman he left me for had cheated on him, left him, and taken the baby with her to another city. Apparently, she had someone else the entire time, someone younger, richer, more willing to play house. Daniel was once again alone, abandoned, and this time without the safety net of a woman to catch his fall. I read the message twice, then put my phone down without a single emotion. Not anger, not joy, just nothing. Daniel had always believed women were disposable, that someone would always stay to clean up his mess. But now, with his mistress gone and the baby taken far away, he was left with nothing but the consequences he never thought would find him. Friends stopped answering his calls, money dried up, and even his once perfect image began to crumble. For the first time, he was forced to face the emptiness he had created around himself. And not a single person rushed in to rescue him. He lost the apartment, then the job, then the reputation that used to open every door. The people who once admired him now whispered behind his back, shaking their heads at the man who had everything and destroyed it all. I heard he moved in with a distant uncle, sleeping on a couch, clinging to pride that no longer meant anything. His world shrank, and with every passing day, he became a shadow of the man who once stood above everyone. Life had finally taught him what loyalty costs when it's thrown away. When I heard the full story, I expected anger to rise, or maybe some bittersweet sense of justice, but there was nothing. Not pity, not joy, not even closure. Just a clean, empty space where pain used to live, like a wound that had scarred over and no longer hurt when touched. I didn't smile, didn't comment. I simply went back to kneading dough, the rhythm of the work grounding me in a peace I had earned. His downfall wasn't my victory. It was just the ending he wrote for himself. Life had already begun moving forward, even before I realized it. I met Alexander on a rainy Tuesday, when he wandered into my bakery soaked, frustrated, and looking for something warm. I offered him coffee, and he stayed for a cinnamon roll and an unexpected conversation about art, travel, and starting over. He didn't know my past, and I didn't ask about his. We just talked like two people who understood what healing really looked like. And somehow, that first conversation turned into many more. Alexander was nothing like Daniel. His presence was steady, his words sincere, his actions quiet but full of meaning. He never tried to fix me or rescue me. He simply saw me day by day for who I was becoming. With him, there were no mind games, no waiting to be chosen, no apologies that never came. He treated my dreams as sacred, my pain as real, and my strength as something to be admired. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was fighting for space, I was being invited in. I didn't fall in love overnight. It came in pieces, in shared breakfasts, soft conversations, long walks at sunset where we said everything and nothing. He held my hand without trying to lead me anywhere, simply walking beside me as I learned to trust again. I still flinched sometimes, still questioned my worth in quiet moments, but Alexander never pushed. He simply waited, steady as the tide, until I believed in love again. And when I did, it was mine on my terms. When I told Alexander about my bakery's expansion plan, he offered support without ego. He invested time, effort, and care, never money or control. We stayed up late making plans, dreaming big, laughing at failures, and celebrating small wins. Soon we opened a second location, then a third, each one stronger than the last. We built something not just profitable but meaningful, a legacy of resilience and reinvention. And every brick carried the weight of everything I had survived. We married in a quiet ceremony by the sea, just us and a few friends, laughter carried by the wind and no ghosts in sight. Later we welcomed 2 children, our son with Alexander's eyes and our daughter with my stubborn smile. Our home was loud, messy, alive in every way my past had never been. I tucked them in at night knowing they would never have to wonder if they were enough. And with every giggle, every milestone, I felt pieces of myself finally made whole. Sometimes I would hear whispers of Daniel's life. Still alone, still bitter, moving from job to job, trying to reclaim a version of himself that no longer existed. He had spent so long running from consequences, he didn't know how to rebuild from the ground. Meanwhile, I woke each day to the scent of fresh bread, the warmth of my children's laughter, and the strength of a partner who never let me doubt my worth. We had lived the same storm, but only one of us learned how to grow after it. Now and then I remember that day in the lawyer's office, the moment everything fell apart and began again. I see myself sitting there, trembling, humiliated, heartbroken, and I want to reach back and whisper, "You'll survive this. You'll do more than survive. You'll rise." What felt like the end was only the middle of my story, a chapter of pain that paved the way for strength. I no longer carry shame, only gratitude, for the lessons, the scars, and the woman I became. I used to think strength meant holding on. Holding in the tears, holding together a broken marriage, holding on to love that wasn't returned. But I learned that true strength is knowing when to let go, when to walk away from what's killing you quietly. It's choosing yourself when no one else does, standing back up after betrayal and daring to dream again. I didn't become stronger because I survived Daniel. I became stronger because I built something beautiful from what he tried to ruin. And now every breath I take feels like a quiet, defiant victory. What began in heartbreak ended in freedom. Not the kind you shout from rooftops, but the kind you feel deep in your bones when you know you owe nothing to anyone but yourself. I built a life without begging to be seen, without settling for half-hearted love or apologies that came too late. I became the woman Margaret believed I was, the mother my children adore, the partner Alexander chose every day without question. And when I look in the mirror now, I see not what was taken from me, but everything I've reclaimed. This isn't just the ending. It's my beginning.